I'm Pat McGrewGroup, Managing Director, and today we're going to talk about the best way to buy software. Might not be what you think. Sure, price is always going to be important, but it's not the only thing that you should be thinking about. So let's look at some of the issues that you're going to find when it comes to software. So let's start with the basics. Software is your infrastructure. It is what sits underneath everything else that you do. And while your software probably has evolved over time in a lot of organizations, pieces are bought to fulfill a project need or to meet some other bottleneck. The aggregation of sort of inconsistent buying policies, people, departments making buys and incorporating things into the workflows that may not like each other, may not work well together. Software that's written in-house and then becomes part of the workflow that doesn't integrate with other pieces. That there are all these things that really do impact your long-term capabilities when it comes to not only moving towards more automated workflows, but also towards optimizing your software costs, because nobody wants to spend more on software than they absolutely have to. And of course, nobody wants software that everybody hates. And sadly, this is something that we hear a lot. Oh yeah, we've got so-and-so for this, so-and-so for that, this piece of software, that piece of software doesn't really work. I have a spreadsheet I use to really do my job, or I have some other piece of freeware that I downloaded. And so at the executive level, they may be thinking they've bought the best software known to mankind to do a certain kind of function within the organization, but the people in the organization have a pretty poor attitude towards it. And as a result, money's being wasted because software was purchased that isn't being used. And not only that, but software may be in use that isn't really supported, integrated in the right ways, and may not be protecting the organization in ways that it should be. So remember I said software is your infrastructure. It's your manufacturing infrastructure. And what that means is that you have to look at each piece of software that you have and identify if it's actually performing to the levels that you've invested in it, right? You put $1 in here, but you're only getting back 20 cents worth of value. That's not a great investment. So you want to understand all the different pieces of software in your organization, and you want to understand how they integrate with each other. And you want to start to think about what software is missing so that when it comes time to allocate some budget to the next software buy, you have an idea of where to plug gaps first. We know from a recent Keypoint study, Keypoint Intelligence did a survey in Europe in the latter half of 2020, where they talked to a lot of printers and they asked very specifically about these different kinds of software and whether they were in use. And 73% of the people surveyed said that they were not using pre-flighting software. And that's a concern, because pre-flighting software and pre-flighting with profiles provides a level of reliability to your output that is directly mappable to your bottom line revenues, your bottom line profits. So one of the things that they said is that, no, we're not doing any pre-flighting. Now, we don't know whether they were really not doing it or they weren't doing it on a programmatic basis. Maybe, a couple of people had a personal copy of a pre-flight tool and maybe they were using it, but there was no consistent organization approach to it. In other cases, the organization just said no. However, for those who did, for that 27% who said that they did have pre-flighting software, every one of them indicated that they could map the use of that software to additional levels of profit. And one of the reasons that happens is because it prevents running jobs that really weren't ready to be run, that are missing resources, have the wrong resources, low-res resources when they shouldn't be there, that were maybe ones that were left in for position only. So we know that there's value to having the right software in the print shop, and we know that there's value in making sure that not only is it there, but that it's performing functions that actually show that it pays its own way. We'll put it that way. So the three areas that we see as the three key areas to look at when you start thinking about plugging holes or filling gaps in your overall software manufacturing infrastructure are the job onboarding process, the pre-flight and prep process, and the delivery and billing process. And the reason we look at these is because this is where you lose the most money. I like to refer to it as leaving money on the production floor. If you are not onboarding jobs in a consistent, normalized way, then you put the burden on the customer service team to plug the holes in the specifications, to chase customers to see what their real intent was, chase the inventory people to figure out what was, if the inventory that's been contracted for is really in place. There are so many things that a good quality job onboarding system can put in play for you by normalizing the capture of job specifications, and in the best of circumstances, hooking into the inventory management system to know that the inventory is available, or to trigger buy orders when it's necessary. In a lot of cases, a good high quality web to print system is the best starting point for job onboarding. For pre-flight and prep, think about pre-flight, making sure all the resources there, optimization, making sure that the file is actually in the best condition that it can be, and all the prep that can go into that, not just in positioning, ganging, and nesting, but even, to color management and things like that. How many tools do you have? How many are you paying for? How many are actually being used? And are the ones that are in use the ones that are actually designed for the output that you're producing today? Or are they the ones that have been hanging around for a while because everybody loves them? So this is one of the things that sends you on a buying spree. And in terms of delivery and billing, having good logistics management software, shipping software that's tied into the shipping companies that you use, making sure that everything ties back into your business billing systems. There's huge value in that. And sadly, in a lot of companies we walk into, when we're doing assessments, we discover that there's no automated tie between the end of the job actually being sent out for delivery, and the billing trigger. And in fact, if there are situations where there have been requests for change along the way, change management is not incorporated into the billing system. And so money's being left on the floor. So that's why your software infrastructure is so important. So when you start thinking about what to do to optimize the software that you're paying for right now, and what to look for in terms of buying your next software, start with what you have. I always like to make a list. And what I'd suggest is that you make a list of everything that you think is in use right now. And, everything you can think of, just scribble it on a list. But then go check with the people across the departments and see if they agree with your appraisal of the tools. See if they're using the tools you think they are, and see if maybe they have a few you didn't know about. Get everybody's lists. Find out what you have. Because from there, you're going to start to be able to, you'll see where the gaps are. And you may discover that there's software in your shop that you're paying for that no one uses. You may discover that there's a bunch of freeware tucked in that you didn't know was there. And it's being used in mission critical ways. You may discover that some of the software everybody loves is no longer supported for a variety of reasons. right? Might be that you're too back level, or it might be that the software just isn't supported anymore. A lot of software has been deprecated over the last few years. It's also important to understand if people are bypassing software that you think is in use. So one of my favorite examples of that is an organization where they had a very popular print MIS system installed, and everybody knew that that's how they were supposed to be tracking jobs, but they actually did it on a Google sheet. Everybody was in on it. They were actually using Google Sheets to track everything. And then at the end of the day, somebody would take all that information and put it into the print MIS. So at any point during the day, business management looking at the MIS would think that they were seeing real time, but what they were really seeing was what happened yesterday. And that's just not uncommon. So if that's the case, that means that you've got a real mismatch between the software that's being paid for and the value that you're getting for it. So this would be a good time to start rethinking that and fix it. Remember that there are tons and tons of touch points in that software manufacturing workflow, and we're not going to talk about every one of them. But think about this sort of roller coaster chart as a way to think about all the touch points and not only people touch points, but software touch points. There are a lot of them. And every one of those touch points, there's money in them. Touch point is time plus money. And if you think about your workflow and the software that's in use, and you're using multiple discrete products where actually one product would do, you're paying for things that you shouldn't be, you're losing time and money. So it's the reason that I ask people to go look really carefully at what they have. So to begin our buying spree, the first thing we want to do is identify what do we have, and identify, attitudes really do make a difference. What software does everybody love? And what software does everybody hate? And see if you can capture the why on it. Everybody, loves the color management system, but they hate the job ticketing system. They love the job ticketing system, but they hate the billing system, or they hate the shipping information system. Whatever it is, see if you can capture the attitudes and see if you can start to dig into why. And then start to look at which vendors fall into the we love this software category and which softwares fall into the we really don't love the software category. Ask questions of your team. Which of those vendors is really responsive and which one isn't? It may be that your lowest cost solution that was put in for cost reasons originally is really costing you money because that company is not responsive. And it takes if it takes a longer time to get problems solved, to get questions answered, to get updates, you're really not saving that much money. So you want to start to balance the cost of the product, how you're paying for it, against the value that product provides into the business. And if all of your team members are telling you, yeah, it might have been cheap, but we're pulling our hair out trying to get answers to questions, this is the time to start rethinking the next time around what kind of criteria you should use when you're buying your software. Talk to the least popular vendors and then talk to the most popular vendors. In some cases, software becomes really unpopular in an organization because there's been a disconnect that's developed. Maybe questions aren't being answered because the methodology that the company, that the vendor uses has changed, and maybe people haven't been trained on it. Maybe they're just not aware of the urgency. Maybe things aren't being styled correctly. Maybe it's a communication problem and not a responsiveness problem. So when you're buying software, find out what your escalation options are when you're not happy with what's going on, and do that same exercise with the vendors that you're working with, who everybody loves, because it may be that everybody loves them, but you're actually working with them outside their normal specs. So we want to think about that too. Vote your ineffective solutions off the island. We want to plan, we want to budget, we want to migrate. Once we identify software that is a candidate for replacement, for whatever reason, it's not doing the job anymore, people hate it, they won't use it, it's no longer as modern as it was when we bought it, there's no API capability, I have no path to workflow automation, all these different reasons that people have for deciding to go into the market to buy new software. Identify what your expectations are of this software that you want to buy. What are all the things that it touches? What are all the touch points? And identify with your teams what their expectations are of a tool that is going to come into that workflow. It's going to be important to get their buy-in, or they're going to go back to their secret ways of doing things. And all that money that you're spending on buying new software, it's money wasted. When you're looking at budgeting, you remember what I said about, paying for software and not really getting the value that you need, not getting the functionality that you need. Let's think about that for a minute. Ask these questions up front. If we've got a problem, how do we get to you? Do you have 24-hour online chat and somebody's always there to man it to not just capture the question, but actually help answer it? There is a material difference, right, between talking to a chat bot that's going from a script versus a live person who can actually answer a question. How do you get notified of upgrades? How do you know what the impact might be on your workflow if software is upgraded? A lot of times software isn't upgraded for years and years because people are afraid of what that upgrade is going to bring. And that's not a safe place to be, right? There are a lot of changes. You miss out on a lot of optimization when you don't update your software. So how can you develop a sense of certainty and security that upgrades will not shut you down? The other thing that you want to do when you're setting your budget is you want to think about what the costs are that you might be able to avoid. Bottlenecks cost money. Bottlenecks reduce your overall capacity. They are a fundamental failure. So you want to be really careful. Make sure that you know how your software costs impact your total TCO. So now we want to talk about migration. Once you know how your software costs are going to impact your TCO, you have to look at what's going to happen when you migrate. Migrate is very rarely is it, plug in some software and magically everything migrates itself. There's going to be a point in time where you need to be running two systems simultaneously. You're trying to migrate from one system to another. You need to understand what the impact is going to be on your business, and you need to understand the costs involved. Are there professional services involved? Are there people involved? When you're buying software, ask questions up front about the real cost of installing. Many companies will tell you there is no professional services involved. We remote in, we install it, we'll get on a Zoom call with you and we'll help you get it set up and it's all yours. Brilliant. Other people will give you the price of the software and they'll tell you that they can't actually tell you how much the professional services cost is going to be because it all depends on what they find, and it depends on a whole lot of factors that they can't quite identify. Whatever the situation, wherever you are on the gamut, have that conversation with the vendors to make sure you understand what it is they really have available for you and what they're really going to be asking you to take on when you're buying the software. Make sure your team understands that as well, because it might be that the solution that they all think is brilliant is one that has a cost that you're willing to tolerate, but a significant amount of professional services associated with it. You need to have a chat with your team to figure out if that still makes it the one that you all want to use. So let's get down to the baseline. Don't buy what you don't need, but do buy what helps you streamline and optimize. Your list and your team should be able to come to an agreement on what the current software tool set should look like, what it should do, and what its gaps are. Having a regular talk with your vendors should help you identify where existing vendors might be able to help you plug those gaps. And they might be able to point you, if they can't plug them directly, they may have partners who can. They very often do. Workflow is pretty well known these days. And no matter how unique you think your environment is, it is very likely that the vendors that you're working with today have solutions that will help you on into tomorrow. If you don't have a path towards automation, workflow automation, this would be a good time to start looking at it. And if any of the software in your bucket is incapable of automation or won't play well with workflow automation frameworks, start laying plans to replace it. This would be the time to do it. Because the more automation you have, including that all-important pre-flighting automation, the less it costs you to produce print. That reduction in total cost of operation is what builds your margin over time. It gives you more capacity. It is what makes you a brilliant printer. Now, before you buy, I've said several times about getting the team together and getting their lists and identifying what they like and what they don't like. Look, the whole idea here is to draw a better line from where you are today to a place where there are fewer bottlenecks, there are fewer loops in the workflow, there are fewer mistakes made, where pre-flighting and optimization is a standard part of the workflow that you have, and the tools that you buy support all those elements. The best way to support it and make it sustainable is to create a training regimen, and I've never met a team yet who thinks that's a great idea. Remember the Dilbert cartoon from the front end of the presentation. But the reality is that if you make it part of the corporate culture, bring in pizza for training, a beer, a bottle of wine, that really does make a difference. You need to keep everyone up to date on the capabilities of the software you're asking them to use. You also need to hold them accountable for using it. Because one of the things we discover when we do assessments is that in organizations where we see a lot of, freeware and spreadsheets hiding under the covers, it's that no one's ever asked them, why they're not using the tools that are installed. No one's ever held them accountable for keeping things up to date in the tools that are being paid for. And that's something that needs to be part of the overall regimen. In a lot of organizations, there's, a regular forum for team members to exchange ideas and issues and solutions and concerns. If you don't have one of those, this is a great time to have one. Begin with buying new software and get the team on board, and then keep them involved the rest of the steps of the way. Look, the software that you buy can lift you or sink you. It's really easy to get enamored with a sales guy who just has the perfect pitch, right? It's really easy for, a salesperson to come in with a great presentation, a great demo, really well-schooled demonstrators, and just blow your socks off. But if your team isn't impressed with them and your team isn't sure, then you should be a little suspicious about whether they're actually going to use this product that you've fallen in love with. Start by knowing everything that you have. Make that list. Know everything that you have a license on, everything you have a subscription on. Who's responsible for keeping that up to date? Some companies, nobody. I have gone into assessments and asked for a list of software, and it literally took a week for them to find all the places that software was installed. So let's think about that. Make sure that everybody who's responsible, and being held accountable, that they raise issues when there's a problem. Don't sit on them. Don't kvetch about them over coffee in the coffee room or on the chat. Make sure that everybody is communicating, and keep the vendors on notice, right? Your vendors should be coming in and talking to you on a regular cadence, depending on how big you are. and how much time you have to give them. Maybe it's yearly, maybe it's, every 6 months, maybe it's every quarter. But every one of your major vendors, your major software vendors, should be talking to you on a regular basis about what they're doing now, what's in the works, what new things they have coming along, new partners that they may have. Because one of the things we know is that some of the happiest customers are the ones who check with their current vendors first. All right, so we're coming down to the wire here. It's 2021. Use 2021 to right-size your software environment and to buy smartly. Do your homework. Make sure you understand everything that you have, where the gaps are, what your team is expecting from software, what kind of user interface they're looking for, what kind of training they're looking for. Do they want it online? Do they want paper manuals? What do they want? How do they want to become integrated with the software? And how do they want the software to be integrated with the other pieces that they're working with? Make sure you understand their needs and their culture, but also help them understand that it can't stay the same. Things have to change. If it doesn't change, then you keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? So what we want to do is we want to create an environment where we know what we have, we know what it costs, we understand who's using it, we understand the value that that software brings to them, and we have a relationship with the vendor that ensures that going forward, that software will always be valuable to us. So that is the world of buying software. It's really pretty easy when you get right down to it. Understand what you're buying before you buy it. Think of your software as the next really cool plasma TV. You wouldn't just run into the big box store and buy the first thing that came along at the cheapest price, right? You'd want to know that it actually was going to do the job you wanted it to do. It was going to have the resolution you wanted it to have, that it was going to map into the rest of your audio components. Software is a piece. Each piece of software you buy is a piece in the journey. Make sure that they all play together, make sure that they can interface with each other, share information with each other, and that builds your way to software and workflow automation. Again, I'm Pat McGrew. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask them. And we're going to talk a little bit more here in a second with my good friend, Richard Askham.